And I want to thank you all for being here. This is the third time that we're having this type of consultation process. We did one for the first time in 2019, then the pandemic hit and we didn't, but we did one in last year and in 2021, and now this is the third time. The purpose is to hear feedback from residents, and it is going to be recorded so that we could post it on our website, and other individuals can hear what you guys come up with as ideas and send more ideas to us by email. It's hopefully, I mean, it's helped us in the past, give us direction, and we're very blessed to have an excellent city treasurer, director of legal services, Angelo Marino, and an outstanding city councilor, Stephen Erdely, in charge of finance. Our finances are run extremely well. Every expenditure is noted and is studied both by Angelo and his team, and also by Stephen and council, in order to ensure that your money, the taxpayers' money, is well spent. And we try to spend it on things that our residents want. And I think we're doing pretty well, but we could always do better. So if there are ideas that of ways in which we can improve our spending to improve the quality of life for the residents of Côte Saint-Luc, that's what we want to hear from you. So that's the purpose of this meeting. It's going to be more about you than about us. So I'm going to let Stephen and Angelo present a short presentation, and then we're going to hear from you so that we can get your ideas on what we could do better. So thank you all for being here, and looking forward to hearing more this evening. Okay, so I'll pass it back to Stephen, I guess.
I'm not sure if Stephen is frozen.
So you go ahead, Angelo.
All right. So thank you very much. Just one clarification. I am the Director of Finance and Director of IT, not Legal Services, but thanks for the new title.
Oh, right, I'm sorry. That was Jonathan. That was Jonathan. I don't know how that came out.
So it is finance and IT. So we want to welcome everybody. We're very happy to have as many people as possible. Like the mayor said, that this is really a session for the residents of Côte Saint-Luc to let council and our department, the finance department, know what are the major priorities that you would like to see in the budget process for next year. So we're going to see a bit of a presentation that kind of explains the budget process that we go through. And then after that, there's a few questions we'd like you to answer. And so that's basically the format. And so I'll start sharing the screen. I hope Councillor Early joins us shortly. I think there was probably just a little glitch. Okay, so there you go. Everybody should be able to see now the presentation. So, so really, we're going to go through the purpose of the budget process and the consultation. The next thing is the timeline and the guiding principles. We're going to just kind of do a quick overview of the operating budget, and then that's where, like I said, we'll get your feedback. We'll then go into the capital investment budget, and we'll explain a little bit of how we establish the priorities there. And then the last thing that we wanted to know is that we disseminate quite a bit of information to the public, and we just want to know what is some information maybe that you're not seeing that you'd like to see, or if you feel that we're doing an adequate job of providing information. Then the last section is the question period. But we will try as much as possible after every section to allow you to ask any questions. So this way you'll have to wait to the very end. So we'll start with a question just to test everything to make sure that it's working well. Oh, welcome back, Councillor Erdely. Oh. So I'll just wait a minute or so just to see if he's able to come back. Okay, I see he's not back. So I will launch the very first question and allow you to answer it. So you see the very first question is, did you attend the pre-budget consultation meeting that we had last year that was held on June 29, 2021? The answer is A for yes and B for no. And I just like to make sure that the polling is actually working. So that's the reason why we're doing this particular one. Okay, so I could see that the majority answered no, that they did not attend, so that's fine. So hopefully you'll get something out of this presentation and we'll be able to get some important feedback from you. So we'll end the poll and we'll continue the presentation. Actually, what I'll do is I'll share the results so you can actually see it. So 1 said yes and 4 said no, that they didn't actually attend last year's session. All right, so we'll go to the next. So the purpose for this consultation, like the mayor mentioned before, is really to allow the public to get a better understanding of how we build the budget for the City of Côte Saint-Luc. And you're going to see that there's some expenses that are fixed expenses. There's very little we could do about them. And there's some that are discretionary. And that's where you, the public, would have an opportunity to let us know where you feel that there could be some priorities that you'd like to establish. So the second part is to really get the feedback from the council, or sorry, from the residents, just to see where you'd like to see priorities for next year. And then where we would be able to add, let's say, new initiatives in the discretionary spending part of our budget. And then the more important one is the capital budget, where we want to see like what are the main projects you'd like to see next year. Examples are roads, sidewalks, infrastructure work related to different facilities or water and so on. So we'll get to that shortly. And then for me, what's very important is the disseminating of the information, because we've been trying over the last number of years to try to share important information. So you'll see several documents that we send out to the public, and we just wanted to see whether or not you feel it's sufficient or whether or not you feel there should be more information out there. So that's the very last point that we'll look at. The next slide is the actual timeline. So just kind of give you a brief idea, then you'll see it's much more detailed in the next few slides, which I will not go through, but we actually start the budget process towards the end of May. So once we finish the financial statements, usually by beginning of May to mid-May, very first thing we do is the revised budget of the current year, and then we start looking at building the budget for next year based on the results of the revised budget of the current year. So in July is when we determine the guiding principles and priorities. So we are just starting that right now. And that's why we need your feedback. Once we get into August and September is where we project salaries and fixed contracts. All right, Councillor Lee, are you okay?
Hopefully you can hear me. I apologize.
I could hear you.
It's one of those days where I seem to be having some problems with my computer, but hopefully everyone's able to hear me nonetheless. So I thank you, Angela, for starting without me. It's funny. I was just saying to you that it's a good thing we have backups. So I'll just add. I know Angela. I know our director and treasurer mentioned, I guess, the reasoning for this. But I just want to, before I go through this slide, I just want to add one more point. That usually when we get to the approval of the budget, the way it had been in previous years, we get to the approval of the budget in December, and at that point we would, we'd adopt the budget and we'd have a presentation. But if a resident came with even the best idea, it was really too late to make any changes at that point. So that's why it's a nice opportunity for us to do this now before it is too late. When we can get that feedback and make changes based on your thoughts. So anyway, we can go back to the next slide in terms of the timeline. So this is just a little graphical representation. And if we start on the top, so basically May, June, if you start at sort of 12 o'clock, May, June, we start looking at the current budget forecast. And now, of course, we're July, we're looking at the guiding principles and priorities. And this is, like I said, the opportunity for residents to share with us. And we know there's some online. Some people, of course, will have the opportunity to view this on our website. And the entire presentation is available both in English and French. Alors, vous pouvez voir la présentation en anglais et en français. So next would be where we start looking at projected salaries, contracts, and prepare the departmental budgets. And I'll just mention this year something a little different. This year, come September, we'll be receiving the new valuation roll. So that's a little different because that usually is every 3 or 4 years. With the new roll will come into effect on January 1st. So that obviously is something we'll look at in terms of next steps. And then, of course, after that, if we go towards sort of the bottom page in November, we look at the capital improvement budget, which, and I'll get into a moment talking about the difference between operating and capital budget, presenting the draft budget to the council, and then looking at different tax rates before, again, finally in December, reviewing and eventually adopting the budget. So those are the key. And I see, so I'm not sure, Angela, if I see someone with their hand up, it's hard to.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, I'll keep going, and then I'll pause at the end of this section for some questions. So to go to the next slide or two goes into a bit more detail. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. So again, the where we're at is that May to August period. And again, this is that opportunity for the pre-budget consultation. And of course, we hear from council as well, and each councillor is taking the feedback from their respective residents. It's also the time where we look at our staffing plan. Do we need to add more staff? And I'll give an example. What we've noticed, let's say in urban planning, since the start of the pandemic, there's been a huge increase in the number of permits that are requested for home renovations and so on. And then the different department heads meet with the treasurer and look at the current year and of course the forecast for this year and beyond as well. And then we'll go to September to October. And again, more meetings with the department heads, the management team. And this is where we really get into looking at the capital submissions, the capital projects. And again, I'll go more detailed. But for the capital projects, we do a 3-year plan. The audit committee, which I chair, and on which there's a few of the councillors and of course several of the directors and the associate city manager and city manager. We review the capital project budget and then look at different scenarios for tax rates. And you'll see in a few minutes, our director, Angela Marina, will show you the tax rates over the last few years. And our goal has been to keep the tax rate in line or below the rate of inflation, which we've done virtually every year for at least the last 10 years. And then again, going to November, December. So this is where we really finalize the budget, have the final reviews, and it's quite a process. And thankfully, we have an amazing team of staff who make sure that we, dot every I and cross every T. And ultimately, the adoption of the budget is in December. I'll just add that it has happened on occasion where we have to adopt the budget in January. The only reason that happens is we usually wait to adopt our final budget to find out until we find out the agglomeration code, what they call the Côte pile, which is the amount of money that Côte Saint-Luc has to pay the central city. Each of the demerged cities has to pay their Côte part, their allocation to the central city, which is about 40% of our budget, or 40% of our taxes go towards that. So we want to make sure that we adopt it correctly. And like I said, we wait till we get that final number. And then I'll go on to our budget and operating orientations and guiding principles. So the first is sort of obvious. We want to make sure we have a balance between revenues and expenditures. We always adopt a balanced budget. We tend to budget cautiously. And the goal, I would say, would be ultimately to end up with a small surplus, but not necessarily a huge surplus. We want to make sure that tax revenue covers the increase, covers the net expenses, and at the same time trying to minimize the increase to taxpayers. And of course, we want to make sure we can optimize the external funding. So we have managed to benefit quite extensively from federal and provincial grants. If we look at Kerwin Park, for example, which is funded, about half of the funding came from the federal and provincial government. If we look at our infrastructure, through the gas tax, which is also again from the federal and provincial government, we get an average about $2.5 million per year, and that helps cover much of the costs of our infrastructure work to our pipes and roads. And we also want to make sure that whenever new services are added, we look at the greater good of the community and, of course, what the long-term costs, and at the same time, trying to be transparent as possible through sessions like this, and as well, posting as much information as we can on our website for residents who want. And I'll go on now to the difference between the operating and capital budget. So this is one that's not necessarily clear for everyone. And I have to admit, even internally, sometimes we have to, there's a few points that are a bit debatable, but generally the operating budget is what we pay to cover the general operations. So this is based on, for example, all our staff are covered under the operating budget, and all the services we do and programs are also, and this is a budget that goes for 12 months from January to December. We revise the budget or do revisions at May 31st and September 30th. We just actually reviewed the first revision, and we look at, we keep track on a monthly or bi-monthly basis to see how we are doing in terms of our expenses and our revenues. Now, the capital budget, again, it's a 3-year budget, and this is for equipment that has a life generally between 5 and 40 years. So I'll give an example. If we are doing major work on a building, if we're repairing the roof, the bricks, if we're repaving a road, redoing pipes, planting a tree, these are all covered under the capital budget. If I can give another example, if we're doing a coat of paint, that would be more of an operating budget. But replacing, like I said, repaving roads, sidewalks, pipes, those are all covered under our capital budget. And I would say that's probably where we have the most heated discussions. And I'll share a little bit more on that later on. But at this point, what I will do is I'll pass on the proverbial microphone to Angela Marino, our treasurer, who will talk about the operating budget, and I'll return a few minutes later in terms of the capital budget. Just one thing, Angela, so because I'm working off my iPad now, I can't see if there's questions, or if hands are raised, so maybe if you can just check before you move on with your section. Thank you.
So right now, I do not see any questions in the question and answer. So if anybody does have a question, you would see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A. You can enter your question there. And I don't see any hands raised either. So we'll continue then at this point. Also, I just wanted to mention before I do move forward that the difference between the capital budget and operating is the financing as well. So usually because these are expenses that last over a number of years. So resurfacing a road, it has a useful life of 40 years. So it's financed through long-term debt and not through taxation. And this is where most of our government grants go. If we do get government grants, they do help offset a lot of the capital expenses. We also have something called the working fund. So this is something that the council has put aside $2.5 million of our own monies from surplus. And we do capital expenses from there. So this way we don't have to actually borrow long-term debt, and we save on the interest part because of the fact that we're borrowing from ourselves. So the next section we're going to look at is the operating budget. And so it really is kind of like that balancing scale that you see on the screen. So we have to look at what money comes in as the money that goes out. So obviously we want to always make sure that we have a balanced budget, or that, at least that there's a little bit of money in case of emergencies at the end of the year. So just to kind of give you a broad overview of our operating budget. So if you look at the revenue part of it, we generate just over $67 million. And a big part of that goes directly to the City of Montreal for agglomeration services. A few slides down, you'll be able to see what the difference is between local expenses and agglomeration expenses. So the taxation that remains with the City of Côte Saint-Luc is just over $36 million. We also have compensation in lieu of tax. So these are government-owned buildings, so they're schools or hospitals that also pay tax, but they do pay a different rate than everybody else. It's called a compensation in lieu of tax. And then we have direct user fees for programs or for permits and licenses. So that's 2,568,000. And then one that's become, something that's been generating more revenues is the transfer duties because of the number of homes that have been selling in the City of Côte Saint-Luc and across, I think, across the world. So we expected to generate $4 million in 2022. Then we also have government grants that are operating in nature. So this is for waste management, recycling, for the library, a few other things like the summer students. It's $1.4 million. And then all other revenues are just over 1.5. So in all, the local revenues that we keep for the City of Côte Saint-Luc is $47,366,000. Like Councillor Early mentioned before, so this is our kind of our guide when we look at the percentage increase for taxation in the future years. So we do have the Conference Board of Canada estimates that are published usually towards the end of October, early November. And that's when we are doing our simulations to make sure that we stay within the rate of inflation. So you see the very last column is what's published by the Conference Board of Canada. And then this is the second column is the actual increase that applied to each of the fiscal years. So in 2014, even though the cost of inflation was 1.7, the increase in taxation was only 0.9, less than 1%. And you'll see the same exercise. There was 1 year, I believe in 2017, where we're a little bit above. But in general, we do try to remain below the cost of inflation as much as we can. Also in 2021, we were very lucky and were able to have a tax freeze. So there was a 0% increase for the average home in 2021. So it just kind of gives you an idea on the graph, our revenues based on the different revenue sources that we have. Like I mentioned before, the compensation, the tax. Yes.
So maybe, Angela, I'll just interrupt because there was a question in the chat about the rate of inflation. So maybe just to backtrack to the previous slide. So what I would say, look, if you look, of course, the last few years, the rate of inflation has hovered, roughly 2%, a little bit more, a little bit less. Obviously, we know right now the rate of inflation is quite high, and it's only, it seems to be going higher. I'm not an economist, and I can't predict where we'll be in 6 months from now when we finalize the budget. And we know the Bank of Canada is doing things like raising the interest rate. But I would say is obviously, our goal is to keep it below the rate of inflation. And I would say, ideally well below, but we won't be able to give that final answer until we work, we get to that point a bit later. And I'll just share one of the key points is also going to be and it was mentioned, the question about the valuation of the homes, how much that goes up, how it compares to the average for the island of Montreal. And that's where there'll be some issues, but we'll be able to share more information on that in September, because like I said, that's when the new role will be coming out, sort of mid-September or so. So anyway, I'll let you continue, Angela. Go ahead.
Thank you. So again, you see just in graph format, the revenues are generated by the different types of revenues. So in general, if we look at salaries and non-discretionary expenses, we see that they go up roughly 2 to 3%. Unfortunately, since 2020, we're seeing that the percentage increase is a little bit higher than that. But we always want to remain below the cost of inflation when determining the tax rate increase. So we have the first question for you that we'd like you to answer. And that's what I'll do is I will actually launch the poll. So in order to ensure that the city raises sufficient revenues for next year, and we want to maintain the services that we have, how would you prioritize the following options to generate revenues? So the first one would be to increase taxes in general. So we put roughly 2 to 3%, like Councillor Lee said before, even though the inflation might be 4 or 5%, our objective is always to stay around the 2 to 3% mark. Or increase user fees for programs. Or C, increase permit costs or other administrative user charges. So far, there's 40% participants that have responded, so we'll wait another few seconds. Okay, so at this point, we'll end the poll and we'll share the results. So 20% said to increase general taxes, and then 80% said to increase permit costs and user fees. Okay, well, thank you very much for that feedback. So now we'll go on to the expense side. We kind of just want to show you in general the revenues. So the expenses is something that's something a little bit more interesting for us to look at, because revenues are much more difficult to predict. Some are pretty consistent, but others are much more difficult to predict, whereas expenses, we can really manage them better. So just to share the $47 million that you saw of the local revenues that stay at the City of Côte Saint-Luc, how do we spend it on an annual basis? So this is the actual budget for 2022. So you'll see that we spent 19.4 million, or we're projecting to spend 19.4 million in salaries. And every time there's a salaries, there's automatically employer contributions. So these are government regulated amounts that we have to remit back to the government. So and that's about $6.4 million. So in general, you see 54.42% of our budget actually goes directly to salaries. Then we have service contracts, and these are many service contracts that we have on an annual basis, including waste management, recycling, snow removal. In general, that's about $9.8 million. And then materials and goods, $5.9 million. Another one that's very important to us is the financing costs, because one of the objectives that we set is that we don't want to have too much debt where it takes a lot of the operating budget. So the goal is that our debt service or financing costs should never exceed 15%. So you see at this point, we're at 14.25, so we're meeting the objective. And then another part of the budget is appropriation. So sometimes we do take money from different surpluses of reserves to help cover some of the cost. So this year we budgeted to take $2.6 million. A portion of that is coming from the surplus, and that's from a specific grant that we received from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in 2020 to help offset some of the COVID-related expenses. And we felt because the City of Montreal would charge in the agglomeration apportionment for the 2022 year, we saved a big part of that grant to be able to offset it. And then all other expenses make up roughly $1.8 million. So that's a total of $47.4 million. And then once you add back the amount that we sent to the City of Montreal for the agglomeration services, we're back to the $78 million of revenues that we generated or expected to generate in 2022. So I mentioned before, so this is the breakdown. So the local service, you see most of that, a big part of that is the City of Côte Saint-Luc's responsibility, and that's administration, public works, road and water infrastructure, waste management, anything related to waste, so recycling, organic, public safety, public security, MS, all the recreation programs, all the library programs, everything in ACC as well, and then anything that's considered debt service or part of the CMM. On the agglomeration side, the $31 million that we sent to City of Montreal covers expenses for police, for fire, the municipal court, municipal evaluation. Like Councillor Lee said, we will be receiving a new role that will be deposited by evaluation services on September 14th. And that's basically trying to reestablish property values on the island of Montreal. So part of the monies that we send is for that particular service. Also public transportation, water treatment and distribution, emergency 911, and some social housing. So this kind of gives you on graph format an idea of how the money is spent by service. So City Council, you see it represents a very small part of our expenses. Administrative services, it's almost $6 million. And employee contributions, because it's all grouped into one section, you see it's quite a large amount. Public safety, public works, it uses up over 10 million, almost $11 million. Waste and water management is just over $4.5 million. Recreation, as well as in the $7 million mark. The library is roughly $3 million, and then debt service, null appropriations, total about $5 million. So now we just wanted to kind of give you an idea of when we're building the budget, what process we go through. So we wanted to explain what is discretionary and what's non-discretionary, and then what's easy to predict and what's more difficult to predict. So when it comes to salaries or remuneration, it's based on a staffing plan of approved position. So every position has a code that's assigned to that position. It's presented to council and approved. So it's based on collective agreements. It's based on other things. So it's all non-discretionary because we have to make sure that we budget the salaries that are required. And it is very predictable because of the fact that we have a staffing plan. We know exactly how much we're going to spend. And like I mentioned before, the employer contributions is attached to the salary as well. So for service contracts, it's a little different. So the service contracts, we actually take the contracts that we have on hand. Normally when we go out to get pricing, it's pricing for 3 to 5 years as much as we can. So this way we know the effect for a few years. These are all negotiated prices as well. And when we're building the budget, we're looking at, for the ones that we don't have a contract, we look at historical spending, and we try to see, with using cost of inflation and so on, what we can budget for next year. And then we also review to make sure that all the contracts that are in the budget are actually required and still relevant on an annual basis. So there's a 4-year analysis that we do of spending, and we check to see whether or not we're actually spending the amount that's in the budget. If not, that money is recuperated so it could be used for other things. And we just kind of give you an idea of the type of contracts that we're talking about: snow removal, waste management, aqueduct work, building equipment maintenance, and so on. So like I mentioned before, a lot of this is non-discretionary because these are contracts that the City of Côte Saint-Luc has signed for either the current year or a few years. And they're quite predictable as well because we have an idea of how much we're going to spend on an annual basis. When it comes to materials and goods, so here too, sometimes we do have actual contracts to purchase something, and other times we don't. And when we do, there's usually the inflation rate that's applied to the budget. When we don't, we look at historical spending to try to get a better idea. And we go through the same exercise of the 4-year spending to see whether or not the budget is still relevant. If it's not, then again, it's recuperated. And just some examples of what we mean by materials and goods. So related to snow removal is the actual salt itself, vehicle repair and maintenance, fuel for city vehicles, all the materials in the library. And then the big one is the water purchase. We buy water from the City of Montreal that then is redistributed to every single household and non-residential property. So that's covered under this. So here there's some discretionary and some non-discretionary monies. And the objective really is whatever is discretionary, we can't really do much. So we put that into the budget. Whatever is non-discretionary, that's where we have a little bit of decision making. We want to keep it in the budget. We want to replace it with something else. And then in general, this is much more difficult to predict because a lot of this that's not under a contract is something that we budget annually, that we kind of forecast how much we think we might need. And then the financing cost is something we know on an annual basis how much we're borrowing, how much we have to then reimburse in long-term debt. So it's quite easy to predict, and it's completely non-discretionary. The government just takes the money from the account when the debt becomes due. So we know how much capital we have to give back every year. We know the interest related to that capital, so that's budgeted for accordingly. And this is completely predictable. And then the very last thing is all other expenses. So this is where some of the discretionary discretionary spending comes in, because this is often very difficult to predict. And we use historical spending most of the times on this. And like I mentioned before, it says here we use a 3-year historical, but we actually use a 4-year historical because we excluded 2020 in our exercise because 2020 was such an exceptional year because of COVID that we don't feel it's relevant. So when we look at it, we look at the last 4 years. And you have some examples of what we mean by other expenses. So one thing that's really been hitting the budget lately, and we show here what are some of the external factors that influences the budget. Of course, the agglomeration quote-part, the apportionment. This is something that the City of Montreal presents to us. We have no say at all in it whatsoever. And usually by, let's say, early November, mid-November is when they present it to us. So we're actually building our budget in September and October And we're using estimates, but we actually get a better idea in November. So it's very, very difficult to forecast or prepare budgets until we get that information. The other thing that we're seeing that's been a huge impact is climate change. So it's changed the way that we have to budget for winter for snow removal because of a lot more freezing rain, freezing and thawing. It's affecting infrastructure as well, like streets and sidewalks. And then the summer conditions, it's the opposite. It becomes very, very warm. It's very dry. There's more watering required, and so on. So we're putting a lot of the climate change issues back into the budget. One that we're also seeing that's really relevant lately is the public tendering. So every time we're going out to get pricing, what we used to see in the past prior to COVID, and what we're seeing now is quite different. So a lot of the prices have increased for everything, materials, supplies, contracts. So we have to take that into consideration when we're building the budget as well. Other things
sorry, Angela, I'll just interrupt. Just in terms of climate change, I'll just give just to follow up on your point, I'll give another example. What we're seeing, for example, is a lot more money being spent on salt because of the up and down, the freezing and thawing and so on. So we've been spending more money on salt. Lately, we've actually been spending slightly less on snow removal, but much more on salt. So I mean, that's something we'll have to see as, in terms of the effect on climate change. And obviously we'll have to map that out over the next few years. But definitely, something as simple as the snow and the winter affects our budget tremendously. So anyway, I'll let you go ahead and continue, Angela.
So you're right about the snow removal, but we are seeing that there's more freezing rain, creating a lot of ice buildup. So there's more in truck rentals and graders and so on than a normal year when we see a lot of freezing rain. So under the water infrastructure, when there's a water main break, that's quite expensive and so on. So we have to always take that into consideration. Just in general, inflation, bank interest rates, market conditions, we talked about the new rule. So what does that mean for property assessments and sales? And one that's very difficult to predict is the transfer duty revenue or the welcome tax, because we don't know how many sales will take place and which type of properties will sell. So it's very difficult for us to try to get an idea of how much we should really budget for. Another one is demographic and lifestyle changes, and that really influences the different programs in recreation and the library. And then just in general technology trends, things like cybersecurity has become very, very important. So we have to make sure that our network is well protected, and we're doing more testing than we would have done historically. And then the very last one is the effect of COVID. So unfortunately, COVID is still among us, and it still has an effect on the operating budget because of program registration and so on. So all of these things are taken into consideration in addition to the historical way of budgeting and staffing plans. We do have to also look at what is the effect of the external factors. So the next thing we wanted to get is your feedback. So here we're going to start asking a few questions. So just kind of like a preamble. So we know that we want to make sure that all residents have an opportunity to take advantage of services that's offered to the public. So we don't gear it towards one particular community or one particular activity. And then we also want to introduce new programs which add expenses, but not necessarily add revenue. So there's always a bit of a conflict there. Which programs do we add? And we want to always stay below the cost of inflation, right? So those are the main objectives. And Councillor really went over the guiding principles, which we use quite often when we build a budget. We go back to the guiding principle and say, does it actually fit this particular principle? So taking all that in mind, the next question that we're going to pose, and I'll just start the poll. So this is question number 3. So if you had to prioritize a particular service in the 2023 budget, what would it be? So is it A, the maintenance of facilities and parks, B, library and culture, C, public safety, that includes EMS and public security, D, public works, and you see roads, parks, maintenance, waste, and snow, and E, recreation and ACC programs. So we'll allow about 30 to 40 seconds for people to vote. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll because we have 75% that responded. And we'll share the results. So you could see 17% selected A to maintain facilities and parks. 17% said public safety, and a big amount, 67% said public works. So to prioritize public works services. Great, thank you very much. We'll jump to the next question. So this one is similar, but it's also important for us to get that feedback. Just 1 second. So in this case, if we had to reduce services, what services would you say would be your lowest priority for 2023? So you have the same list. A for maintenance and facilities, maintenance of facilities and parks. B for library and culture. C, public safety. D, public works. And E, recreation, ACC. So again, we'll allow about 30 seconds for people to vote. All right, so we'll end the poll at this point. So you could see that 17% said the maintenance of facility and parks, 67% said library and culture, and 17% said recreation, ACC. Great, thank you very much. And we have one last question. So the question here, is there a new priority or initiative that you would like to see in the budget for 2023? So the answer is yes or no. And if you do answer yes, please identify in the chat or question answer what it is that you would like to see in the budget, and then answer the second part. How do you feel realistically we can actually finance that new initiative? Is it increasing taxes or increasing user fees? Again, we'll allow about 30 seconds for you to answer this question. Okay, so we'll end the poll here. So, so 75% said yes, that they would like to see a new initiative, but I don't see anything in the chat. We'll see if it's in the question answer, because I'm curious to know what are the new initiatives that you would like to see, if any. And then we could see that it's a 50-50 split. Increasing the taxes and increasing user fees would be the methods of financing the new initiatives. But it would be great if you could actually send, like I mentioned before in the chat or in the question answer, what are some of the new initiatives that you would like to see in the 2023 budget?
I think there are one or two comments in so I'm just Angela, I'm just looking in the Q&A. So I see one point was about a preliminary feasibility study for a sound barrier near the railway yard, which is a very interesting one. And then I see, oh, sorry, it's okay. No, I've seen the same one twice. Yeah, so feasibility study for a sound barrier near the railway yard. I would say, if there's other ones, you could put them in the chat. I would say it's a very interesting question. I'm not sure how simple or complicated that one is, but let me follow up. I know that our city manager, Jonathan Schechter, is deals on a regular basis with CP. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, other than to say we've been working with them and tracking, and I know I've gotten complaints from residents about increased traffic on the line that cuts through Côte Saint-Luc. But definitely, let me look into that one. I've taken note of it, and I'll see what can be done in terms of next steps.
Okay, and there is also one in the chat, initiative into brown water usage in residential homes. Are you familiar with that, Councillor Lee?
It's a good, so what I can say, oh, sorry, I was looking on the Q&A, not the chat. I'm just seeing this one now. So in terms of the, brown water usage, I can tell you we are looking into it, but not, so to answer the question, not for single family homes at this point. Where we are looking at it is for some of the new developments. And I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but for those of you who may have attended the master planning session, there are discussions going on in terms of the 3 malls that are in Côte Saint-Luc. So the Cavendish Mall, Côte Saint-Luc Shopping Center, and DeCarry Square. And, over the next 5, 10, 20 years, there'll be, let's say, major changes at the malls that'll see more of a mixed use type of situation, a mixed use in terms of residential, commercial, institutional possibly as well. So what I can tell you is we are looking into it in terms of those 3 locations. We actually had looked into it for the Cavendish Mall for the first phase, but it wasn't feasible at that point. But we are looking at it again for those 3 locations. So I would say that would be the next step in terms of for a residential home. Right now, my understanding is given the system is already built, it's exorbitant in terms of pricing, but for a new development, it's something that is more reasonable. And I'm just looking here on the feasibility sound barrier to reduce the fumes at the pool. I'm not sure if that's referring to the outdoor, the Park Haven pool. So that one, I don't have an answer. Okay, so I see yes. So like I said, on this one, let me speak to our city manager, and we can definitely look into that. And I would say, for those that are asking the questions about it, you can send me an email directly at serderly@cotesaintluc.org, and I should say it'll probably be in August. I'll get back to you. I mean, email me. You can email me now, but I'll get back to you because I know I'll be out of town for a little bit. I know the city manager as well, so just send me an email, and I'll get back to you in early to mid-August with a more definitive answer on this one. All right. So we'll continue with the capital investment budget. So I'll be doing the next section. So I'll just, the next slide or two, I'm not going to go through it point by point, other than to say the largest, amount, the largest number, if you look, is that top row in terms of the infrastructure. It's repairing the roads, the sidewalks, LED lights, sewer sleeving, and so on. So that is the biggest one, and you can see it's about $10 million. Some of the other ones, the building and improvement, the vehicles, tends to be about $600,000 to $800,000. I'll just say on the vehicles, we used to spend over $1 million a year. The reason now it's less is because we've managed to upgrade our fleet over the last few years. So I can tell you when I started, and for those who've lived in Côte Saint-Luc for a long time, you'll recall the old vehicles were painted in sort of a turquoise green color. So when I started as a councillor, there were vehicles that were going back to the 60s. So you can imagine there were vehicles that were 30, 40, some odd years old, which had passed their prime, and we were spending more on repairs and maintenance to keep these vehicles going than to purchase a new vehicle. So we've managed to do quite a good job in terms of upgrading the fleet. And then you can see some smaller expenses on the bottom, office equipment and other, in terms of things like mobile shelving for the library. And then if we go to the next slide, you'll see that, so the total, over the next few years is in the vicinity of $12–13 million. However, we are lucky that, as mentioned, that we were getting large amounts of funding from what's called the TECQ, the tech grant. So that covers a big portion of the infrastructure. What I can say also is in terms of the tech grant, and I'll go into more detail in terms of the priorities a bit later in a few slides from now. But of course, in order to get this money from the higher levels of government, they have to meet certain criteria in terms of piping, being a bigger priority versus roads and so on. And as mentioned, we also have gotten funding for projects like Kerwin Park. So the goal for the city is to be spending about $6 million per year, to borrow about $6 million, and we pay back about $6 million per year as well. So we try to keep our debt, let's say our debt load as a percentage of our taxation and taxation revenue. And, in terms of a total dollar value, we try to keep it where it is. And if anything, over the last 10 years, we've actually managed to reduce it. So we'll go on to the next slide. So I'll share, so these are some of the bigger projects that we've been working on for the last few years. So I'll start, I'm just gonna pull up some data here to share at the same time. So in terms of sleeving of, so we've been focusing the last few years on sewer sleeving. So these are the pipes for used water. We also, in terms of aqueduct sleeving, so this is sleeving of freshwater pipes. So what I can share is we've sleeved in the last few years, we've done about 24% of the water pipes in Côte Saint-Luc have been sleeved. It's one of the highest amounts of any city on the island, possibly any city in the province of Quebec. In terms of lead pipe replacement, this is another priority for the city. As an example, last year, we replaced 118 lead service lines, and we did 226 pneumatic excavations. So these are excavations where we dig a hole to see whether the pipe is lead or copper, and which side, whether it's the resident side or the city side. And for this year, we're actually doing 887 of these pneumatic excavations, and we'll be doing quite a few replacements as well. One of the things we're doing this year is putting in water meters, 380 residential water meters. So already all the institutional, the commercial establishments in Côte Saint-Luc have these water meters. So for this year, it's a pilot project with 380 meters. We've divided them fairly evenly across the 8 districts in Côte Saint-Luc. Over the next few years, and this is something we'll be doing as part of the agglomeration responsibility, is to have water meters for every home to better get a sense of the usage and hopefully encourage residents to cut down on their waste in terms of water. So road resurfacing and sidewalk projects continue to be a priority. In terms of sidewalks, I'll share we've done about an average of 1,300 meters, so 1,300 square meters or linear meters of sidewalk per year over the last 5 years. LED streetlights, so we're at about 800 streetlights that we've done so far, 832 streetlights that we replaced, and we're going to continue to do more. Parks and public spaces, the biggest one is Kerwin Park that we're completing, but we're also working on a lot of smaller parks, the aquatic center roof and building envelope, and again, the public works fleet in terms of the older vehicles. And I can tell you one of my personal priorities is to replace as many vehicles as possible with electric vehicles. And this is something we'll be doing a more detailed analysis, especially as the price of fuel goes up, looking at how much we're actually spending per vehicle and at what point does it become cheaper for the city to purchase an electric vehicle, as many residents, I'm sure, themselves are doing. So we'll go on to the next slide. So this is where, this is in terms of the spending for the current year for 2022. So water infrastructure is still the top priority. And I'll just mention, and I know, the question is, well, why aren't we doing more in terms of roads? What I can tell you is, I've seen it in Montreal, for example, where they'll do the road, and then a few years later, they'll rip up the road to do the pipes underneath. My philosophy is let's focus on the pipes first, because I prefer to deal with what's underground. And of course, once we repair or sleeve the pipes, generally they last and, are able to be maintained for another 30, 40 years. So my feeling is it makes sense to do that first, and then the road resurfacing after. So again, you see some of the other priorities, the traffic, streetlights, and parks and greens, and so on. So we'll go on to the next slide. So these are some of our priorities for 2023, for next year, that we're looking at. So one of the big ones, again, is the road resurfacing, as we are slowly, increasing our percentage or our number of kilometers of pipes that are being done. We're working again on the roads and sidewalks. We also are doing an upgrade for the Chaque Park wading pool to convert it to a splash pad. This is one that has been talked about for years. The outdoor pool locker room renovation, would, as you know, we've done the outdoor pool a few years ago, but the locker room is still in need of replacement. Continuing with the lead service lines, it's doing a few more traffic lights, the LED street lights to continue, and this is a project that will take a few years, and the roof of the annex. So for the Confederation Annex in Trudeau Park, we did the surface, and of course we put in coolant so that it can be used for several months of the year, but the roof is in need of repair. So I'll just check. I think there's a question. So I see here a question about trees, given the hazardous state, especially. This is a interesting question. So there's a question about trees. Look, what I can share is this: the city has cut down about 2,100 trees, 2,100 trees in the last 8-9 years, most of which were due to the emerald ash borer. We planted about 2,000 trees, so we're still, and that's, I would say, since 2015. So we're still in a deficit of about 100 trees. My feeling is, we have to look at, seniors, and we have to look at also all residents. And the more trees we have, the more shade, the more environmentally friendly the city is, the more green, the greater canopy. I'll just mention, and not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I see it, I see it just driving around. I've seen it when I'm flying into Montreal. For those who are flying in or out in the summer, as you're passing over Côte Saint-Luc, take a look and see what you see compared to, let's say, TMR or some of the other cities. And you'll see that Côte Saint-Luc is lacking in canopy. I can tell you, just flying in, I can see TMR and it's lush and green, and I see Côte Saint-Luc and it is not as green as it should be. So I would say definitely something we are doing. I mean, I should mention that we are spending, just rough numbers, about 3 times as much money. We're spending about 3 times as much money on sidewalks as we are on trees. So definitely sidewalks are more of a priority. And there'll be a question in a few moments asking you where you would spend the money. So, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I think there was one more comment. I'm trying to do a few things at the same time here. I think there was a comment about splash pads. What I would say, this is a good question. What I could tell you is the wading pool at Rabin Park was one that has had issues in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of water leaking, in terms of the quality of the water, the cleanliness of the water as well. So this is one. I could tell you what I can share is the Côte Saint-Luc water is tested. The pool water is tested on a regular basis. The Côte Saint-Luc pool has never failed a test. I can't necessarily say the same about the wading pool at Rabin Park. So it's been an issue of hygiene as well. And so this was a decision made. However, I will definitely pass on the feedback to the council and the mayor. But right now the plan is to replace it with a splash pad. So we'll keep going. So again, this is in terms of priorities where they fit on a grid. So you could see for next year, for 2023, the priority is the roads and infrastructure, and like I said, parks as well in terms of doing more work. But we're planning on focusing more on the roads over the next few years. In terms of how we decide, in terms of priorities. Well, first, for every project, there has to be a business case. So it has to be a business case, which explains why we need to do it. And highest priorities are linked to things like grants or where there's health and safety obligations. And in terms of grants, it depends, like I said, on the grants from the provincial federal government. Health and safety, I'll give an example. We had to do some work at the public works yards, and it's something we're going to continue to do because we wanted to make sure that it was safe in terms of our staff and for our employees. So then the second priority is for professional services. So this is these are for engineers who help us plan out the projects. The city, we have a relatively small staff. So in terms of the engineering side. So when it's a larger project, we hire, so I'll give an example, the road repaving, we hire the company to do the roads. We hire another company, an engineering company that oversees the project. Priority 3, again, are roads, sidewalks, parks and vehicles. And even though we do officially a 3-year plan for the public and is required by the provincial government, we actually do a 5-year plan internally. And at the same time, each year we keep updating it. And, we listen to, try to take into consideration the feedback, whether it's, whether it's feedback on splash pads versus wading pools, definitely something we'll take into consideration, or points like a feasibility study for a wall along the CPR. So these are things we'll definitely keep in mind. And I can tell you some of the most heated discussions and debates around the council table are about the capital projects. So we'll go on to the next slide. So next we have, so I'll share. So this is where we're going or thinking of going over the next few years. And then in a moment, we'll ask for your feedback. So again, over the next few years, like I said, road resurfacing, continuing with the sleeving, lead pipe, sidewalk, renovations to public works yards and the building envelope of the public works building, continuing with the curb and park renovations, and small park equipment as well. So I'll just mention on this point that we have a public spaces committee that meets regularly every month or two and looks at the smaller parks, because we know that we cannot do multi-million-dollar renovations on a park every year. It's costly. So what we try to do is put in a small piece of equipment here and there, upgrade, adding water fountains or small water toys to a park when we can't necessarily do a complete makeover, such as Kerwin Park is going through right now. And finally, the ACC roof and building envelope. Although the building is relatively new, we have to make sure it's maintained, and we want to make sure that there's no issues. So,
Councillor Lee, you may want to just identify the 3 priorities that were set for these small parks and green spaces at the public spaces meeting, just so everybody understands our goal for the next few years.
No, it's definitely a good point. Thank you for the reminder. So in terms of the public spaces, so we had a few priorities for the smaller parks. So the first one is in terms of water. So we looked at some of the parks that don't have a water fountain or any water. So that is being done this year, and next year, we're going to have in every park. The goal is to have water, and what we're trying to do as well, put it on not just water fountains, like I said, a small spraying toy, and as well a dispenser whenever possible for water bottles, so that people can refill their bottles there. The next one is shade structures. So we're looking at putting in more shade structures because we see the effects again of climate change, the heat island effects. So we want to put in the shade structures. And the third one is looking at the surface. So and I can share, this is one that I get feedback on often. I know we've gotten feedback in terms of sand wasp in some of the parks. My personal philosophy is I still think there's a need for sand. If I can give the example of Schwartz Park, where we did a renovation a few years ago, we replaced the surface of the play area with a rubberized surface. So we're going more towards the rubberized surfaces or wood chips. However, we still kept a small area for sand because I still think it's nice. I remember myself playing in the sand and with my children when they were younger. So that's my personal take on it. But again, the goal is to relook at the surface. So those are the three priorities that we'll be looking at in terms of, in addition to small piece of equipment, but three priorities that we'll be looking at for the small parks over the next few years. So in terms of rough budgeting, so, and I'll share some examples. So everything is expensive, and I can share also that with inflation, we've seen increases just in the last year. So these numbers will probably change. So, as an example, with lead replacement costs, so it costs about $18,000 to $20,000 when you factor in the professional services to replace a single lead service line, lead pipe service line. And so if you multiply that out, we're talking about $30 million. Now, the city can't do it overnight. So it is something that will take years. What I do, just to go off on I'm just checking the time, just to go off on a slight tangent, just a reminder to residents that if you haven't yet, and if you live in a home that was built during those years when lead may have been used, please get your water tested. I did mine last summer, and the goal is this summer to finish doing the testing, and based on that, to work on a long-term plan. Already, our engineering department has worked on some preliminary plans, but we're waiting till we get more data to finalize the plan in terms of prioritizing which streets and areas. And the hope is by doing more in a certain area through economies of scale, it'll be cheaper, and we can hopefully bring down that cost as well. In terms of park renovation, so we're looking, and this is with regard to more the public spaces and small park budget, we're looking at about $300,000 a year. For road resurfacing, we're looking to spend about $2 million a year. And if you can think about it, so an average road, as mentioned, is about 1,300 square meters. So about $500,000. So we would be able to do about 4 roads or 4 sections of roads per year. So this is still a lengthy process, but one that we hope that we'll be able to take more of a bite out of. And I'm just looking, I have a question. So it's question is it possible for the city to organize replacement of pipes on streets so that citizens can save individual cost of replacement? So what I can share is this. So when the city, and I can give an example, we've done this in the last few years on certain streets. So what we've been doing when we repave a road, the city is using that as an opportunity to do the pipes at the same time. So we are doing our pipe, let's say the city pipe, which is generally from the property line or from the valve to the main that is under the street, and the resident is responsible for the section of the pipe from their home to their water valve, which is a little valve on their lawn. Now, what we've done is we've reached out to residents beforehand and said, hey, in June, July, August, this is obviously we don't know the exact date, but we are going to be doing it, and we encourage residents to do it at the same time because it's cheaper for them because it is open. Generally we're doing the excavation already, so it's easier for them to do it. Now, what we haven't done, and this, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. What we haven't done is we haven't specifically encouraged residents to go to a certain contractor because from our lawyers, we've been told that if we do encourage residents to work with a certain contractor and there's an issue and that contractor does something wrong, then technically the city could be liable. However, like I said, the goal would be to encourage residents to go to get their work done at the same time because it's cheaper because there's already, the excavation is being done. So it's cheaper once, things are already opened up. So what I can tell you is A few years ago, I'll share, a few years ago when we started, very few residents took us up on the offer. But I can say in the last year or so, it's the opposite. The vast majority have, and I'll just mention that the new law is, which was recently adopted, is that once the city changes our side of the pipe, a resident has 10 years to do it, to do their side. So, if we were to change someone's pipe in 2022, that resident would have by 2032. Now, we did it because we know financially it is expensive as well, and we don't, want to put that burden on every resident. But again, we encourage you to try to do it at the same time. So I'll keep going. So in terms of rough costs, so again, and this, to go back to the question earlier, so we spent about 600,000 per year on sidewalks, and this is, I should say this is an increase to what we had been spending. And this is more to the vicinity of 2,000 meters per year, up from about 1,300, which was our average. And if you see, in comparison to the trees, so we were spending about triple the amount. In terms of traffic lights, 500,000 to 600,000. However, that is going to be relatively short term for a few years, because we've done most of the lights. LEDs also, we're I forget if we're on year 3, I think, of the current plan. So there's about 2-3 more years left. And then it's, again, some other projects, tree planting, city vehicles, IT equipment, and furniture and facilities, which is about 200,000. And so things like the cameras, servers, you can imagine, just like anything, the computer has a life, and we have to make sure that we maintain them so that our staff and citizens can of course be able to use them as they need. And now I'll move on to a question. So I'll kind of give a general sense of the question, and then I'll ask Angela to put it up in a moment. So the question is, if you had, that song, if I had $1 million, in this case though, if you had $5 million to invest in capital projects, how would you invest it? So we have lead pipe replacement, park renovations, road resurfacing, sidewalk reconstruction, traffic, and others. Now, we weren't able to do this question in a perfect format, so it's actually a question made of a few sub questions. So if you can, I think everyone can see it now. So for each of them, if you can answer how much you would spend on each of these priorities. So if you kind of scroll down, so the first one, again, the number 1 is lead replacement, park renovation, road resurfacing, sidewalk reconstruction, traffic and streetlights, and other. And we'd ask each of you to choose a value for each one, from $500,000 to $3 million. Try in your, if you can, to make the total of all the items add up to $5 million. So we can get a sense as to where you think the money should go. And this is, like I said, this is the most heated discussion we have when we sit around, now I guess the online Zoom table, and one day, of course, back to a real table and discuss it. So we'll give everyone, I'll give everyone about a minute, because this is a bit of a tough question. So if everyone could take a moment and go ahead and answer the question. So again, number 1, the first one is lead pipe replacement. The second one is park renovation, road resurfacing, sidewalk reconstruction, traffic and streetlights, and other. And try to imagine if you were in our shoes, in the shoes of the council and the directors sitting around a table, where would you spend the money? So I'll give, like I said, I'll give everyone a minute or two to answer this. All right, I see some coming in. All right, I'll give everyone another 45 seconds or so. So again, this is like I said, this is a discussion. We know we have about $5-6 million after grants in terms of spending, and where should that money be spent? All right, so we'll give another 30 seconds or so. And I guess just to mention for other, I see if you have other, then I would say just to put it in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to that one in a moment. All right, so we'll go on let's say another 10 seconds or so. All right, so we'll pause it there. All right, so I don't know, can everyone see that? I hope so. So if we go through them, and I realized, yeah, I saw a comment, there was no zero, so sorry, I apologize for that if it didn't allow everyone to answer. It's the first, we sort of changed the formatting this question from last year, so we'll keep working on this one for next year. So we'll start with lead replacement. So we have 2 million or 2.5 million. So that seems to be one of the larger ones. If we look at park renovations, seems to be the lowest. So 0.5, 500,000 or 1 million. If we look at road resurfacing, we have a few votes for $1 million. For sidewalk reconstruction, 500,000 to 1 million. And then in terms of traffic and streetlights, only the lowest one at 500,000. And in terms of other, we have some at, now I understand, hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me close that. So I sort of see that in the chat. Oh, so now I understand. So if you didn't put, there was no zero option, so you had to put 500,000 for, okay, well, that's something to learn from. Sorry about that. And I see here, okay, so no, that's perfect. All right, well, thank you. It's, look, I would say just, I guess, general thought, lead pipe replacement seems to be the top one, and traffic and streetlights seems to be one of the lower ones. So that's interesting to see. And move on to the next slide. So in terms of the context, just to mention, so we've, the goal has been to keep our total debt in terms of the capital interest below 15%. And I think we were hovering around 15%. I think we're down to about 13, 14%, although we'll see with the latest increase in interest rates, we'll see if that pushes it up back to that 14, 15%. Again, the goal is to borrow about 5-6 million and keep our debt as low as possible. Our current local debt is 52 million. And we'll keep going to the next one. And then I think, yeah, so after this, we'll finish this one, and after that, I'll pass it back to Angelo. So in order to keep the long-term debt repayment below, and then the question is, hold on, I can't, okay. So I think this is I think it's the wrong question. Okay.
No, it's the right question.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, so the question is really, should we increase taxes to allow additional road and sidewalk repairs or other infrastructure? So the answer,
sorry,
the answer is either A, yes, or no, B.
Yeah, no, sorry, you're correct, Angela. Sorry, I got mixed up in the order for a moment. So yeah, should we increase taxes? Yes or no? And we'll wait another 10-15 seconds for everyone to answer. And again, this seems to be the number one point, one of the top points as well. All right, so it seems, here, I'll stop the poll. So it seems evenly split in terms of roughly 50-50 for yes and no about increasing taxes. And then close that. And I will pass the microphone over back to Angela. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. So the last section that we wanted to get feedback on is whether or not we're communicating enough information related to finance or just in general. Are we communicating information about the budget and then the year-end results? So just very quickly, what are the things that we're doing right now? So we do have this pre-budget consultation, which is something that's very important to us. And then once we do build the budget, there is a presentation made by Councillor early before the budget is adopted. So you get to see the actual results or the budget that we're proposing to adopt. And we actually then send a copy of that budget, a summarized version of that, to every single household. Many other cities post on the website or they might put it in the paper, but we chose, the City of Côte Saint-Luc always chooses to make sure that every single resident in Côte Saint-Luc receives it in the mail. So that's when it comes to the budget, what we're doing. And you see the budget is quite detailed. I don't live in Côte Saint-Luc, I live in another demerged city. Ours is very general in nature. And sometimes you don't necessarily have a good feeling or understanding of how the city is spending money. That's why in Côte Saint-Luc, we choose to show something a little bit more detailed. So this is also on the website. This is the update that we do. So on an annual basis, when we actually adopt the budget, we put this on the website to give you an idea of how much we spend. On the expense side, you also have the same thing on the revenue side, by service, and then we break it down by remuneration, employee contribution, a little bit of what you saw before, the service contracts, materials, the financing, and others. So to give you an idea, a little bit more information. And this document is updated when we do the revised budget. Like we mentioned, May 31st and September 30th are the dates that we normally take a picture of the current year's budget, and we look at what revisions are required, what were some of the unforeseen expenses that we didn't project when we built the budget last year, but we're starting to see a pattern of new expenses coming up. So we take those into consideration. Also, we can see revenues, whether or not the revenue projections are on target, or do we have to readjust the revenue budgets accordingly. So this is a quite interesting document. It's available in Excel, so you could actually sort it any way you want. And it's also available in PDF. And we do update it, like I mentioned, May, September, and then the year-end results. When it comes to the capital budget, that one's a little bit more complicated. We're trying to find a format that we think is going to be easy to understand and yet provides enough information to the public. So we did finalize something that we think is something that could be useful, and we'd like to get your feedback at some point. So this is a report that shows all the projects that will be worked on in 2022. It shows where the funding is coming from, what the budget available is, or if there are any adjustments that are made to the budget during the course of the year, the completion percentage of that project, and the estimated completion date. So that's something that we're working on now that we want to put on the website shortly. And that one too will be updated on a regular basis, probably not as often as the operating budget, but it will be at least twice during the course of the year. Regarding financial statements, so we do put on the website the detailed financial reports that we have to produce for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. But we also have condensed financial statements that we do in English because the report is only available in French. So that's also available to you, and that's presented both in Excel format and PDF format as well. There's a mayor's report that explains the year-end results as well as much as we can. It's quite a detailed report that the mayor produces. And there too, it's, we choose to mail it to every single household and not just put it on the website. So the last question that we're going to pose is the following. So we're just focusing on the last 3 years because we feel like we've made major improvements over the last number of years. So in the last 3 years, do you feel that the city has provided important information regarding the budget and year-end results? And we didn't want to assume it's yes, no. So, actually, the question that's actually in Zoom is the opposite. So we'll go with the question in Zoom. So when you're voting, A is yes and B is no. And if the answer is no, what additional details do you think you would be interested in receiving or us posting on the website? So do you feel like we're doing enough to present to you important information regarding the budget and the year-end results? A for yes, B for no. And if it's no, let us know, because I'm always interested to see what people would like to see on the website so we can enhance what we're putting out there so people can understand our budget process, the actual budget, and then how we ended up the year. Okay, so we'll wait another 10 seconds. Okay, so we're going to end the poll and we'll share it. So it looks like the people that voted, 75% or 100% that voted, said that yes, they feel that there's enough information on the website. But if there is something, then please let us know. And I'm just going to go to the very last slide. Councillor Early gave his email address if you have anything specific that you want to send him. But if you have something, more information you want to share, there's this email, finance@cotestluc.org, is where we receive very important comments that you might have. So if you feel that there's something else that we can post on the website or that we could share either through a mailing or any other method, please let me know. I would be curious to understand what else it is that you think would be important. So at this stage, we're at the question period. There were some questions that were asked during the presentation, but are there any specific ones that you would like answered at this point?
Just going through the questions. So I just one that I see a question, well, more of a comment from Councillor Burku, and I want to say a special welcome to, I know Councillor Burku's on, Councillor Cohn as well, Councillor Schuster, and also our city manager, Jonathan Schechter, also is on as well. So I want to thank them for being part of this. So the comment was from Councillor Burku, was a very good one, that there's a need for new development or new redevelopment. If you can imagine, as we do some of this new redevelopment in the 3 shopping malls, the 3 locations that I mentioned, Cavendish Mall, Côte Saint-Luc Shopping Center, and DeCarry Square, it will lead ultimately to more tax revenue for the city, which will allow us to make sure, of course, we can introduce new services. We can do more road repaving, road repairs, pipes, and so on. And hopefully that'll help us do it without having to increase taxes for residents, because ultimately, as our treasurer Angela Marino mentioned, technically the capital projects we borrow money for. However, we have to pay that money back, and that money, when we pay back those bonds, or when we pay back for the capital purchases, basically it's coming from our tax dollars, and we don't want to increase taxes. So just to mention that, and I see a thank you in the comments as well. So no, we appreciate that. Look, the goal of this is to share the information and like I said, to hear the feedback. So we've taken note of some of the comments. For example, the feasibility study in terms of the wall along CP yards, looking at splash pads, looking at some of the priorities in terms of the pipes, in terms of the roads. So we've taken note of that as well. And I'm just checking. So that's just looking in the chat if there's anything else. No, I think we covered those. All right. So I want well, before we thank everyone for joining, I want to say a special thank you again to our treasurer and director of finance and IT, Angela Marino, for really, well, I would say not just for the presentation, but for everything he does behind the scenes to make sure we're on budget, to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the residents, but also doing it with financial measures that make sure that the money is well spent, and putting in internal controls to make sure that things are done well and by the book, and we keep meeting with the different departments, making sure they are all following these internal controls. And I see the mayor. I'll pass the microphone on to the mayor to say a few closing words.
I just want to congratulate you both. You did an excellent presentation. It was very interactive and, very, very well received from those who participated. And hopefully more will watch it and give their ideas and their feedback after they see this presentation. It was great. I wish we had more people to participate in the surveys. I think it's a great source to have those type of surveys and get the feedback and percentages of who wants what. Extremely well done. And yes, I really am appreciative of having Angelo Marino as our Director of Finance, Treasurer, and IT. He's really superb. The city would not be in the financial position that we are in if it wasn't for Angelo, and the residents would benefit by the reasonable tax rate we've been able to maintain below the rate of inflation, and we plan to continue to do so, and hopefully at the same time continue, not hopefully, we have to continue to reduce our debt. So we're doing well, and we're going to hopefully do better. As we reduce our debt, we pay less in interest, and now we see interest rates are going down, so it's going up. So it's even more important to reduce the debt, and that will continue to be a priority. So thank you both. Thank you, Councillor Italy. He's on top of everything. He checks every page and all the disbursements every month. He checks every single one and highlights at every council meeting the big ones. But he checks the small ones too. So thank you for that. So our money is always being carefully spent, and I really appreciate your great work. And thank you to the councillors that were here today. Let me see again. I want to mention those with us: Andy Schuster, Dita Burku, Mike Cohen, and our city manager, Jonathan Schechter. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So we'll stop the recording and we'll terminate the session. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.